Hey, it's me, I'm back. I know I'm kind of almost out of shot there, but the reason is because I'm more concerned that you'll be able to see the screen than I am concerned that you'll be able to see me. I did change hats for you, though. I thought I'd switch out hat. Okay. And let's see here. Now what I've got are 4 modern characteristics of neoclassical economics. I showed you where it emerged from, and now I want to tell you what it looks like today. And I should preface this with, I mentioned this earlier, it's the biggest school of thought. So let's say it was a school of thought of one person, all right? There'll be very little variation from one member of that school of thought to another in terms of what they believed. In fact, there would be no variation at all. So as you get larger, the potential for variation in perspective from one person to another, even within the same school of thought, also gets larger. So I'm forced to have to say, you know, this is what they believe. But when, of course, that's not entirely true. I tried to pick out the factors that were the most central to neoclassical economics. But again, as I say, when it's a very large school of thought, it's actually kind of difficult to generalize like that. But hey, we're going to generalize. All right, and I think this time what I'll do is sort of write these 5 on the board. These are all covered in the book. I'm just making sure you understand these things. And I'll explain each one in turn, because that's what you're paying me to do. Axiomatic modeling. I did some axiomatic modeling when I was younger. Okay. Axiomatic modeling. Marginal analysis, general equilibrium framework, free markets as natural and benevolent, and rationality. So these are 5 characteristics I'm claiming that are representative of modern neoclassical economics. And all these things emerge from my list I showed you there of natural law, Cartesian deductivism, and political individualism. All right, first one. This is an approach characterized by the use of arguments based on untested and presumably obviously true premises. This is about premises, about picking premises. And hey, let's actually ask the internet here, since we have that sort of technology nowadays. What is an axiom? A statement or proposition which is regarded as being established, accepted, or self-evidently true. Something that's obviously true. All right. And Dr. Butler just texted me about baseball. And apparently one of my players just did very well. It's something that's self-evidently true. Okay, so remember with Descartes, we're picking out premises that are self-evidently true. So this is a modern characteristic of neoclassical economics. For example, when I took introductory microeconomics back in 1980, I think so, back in 1980, one of the things that I was taught was that business owners want to maximize, maximize profits. All right. So that when we were talking in micro class about the behavior of businesses, the goal of business was to maximize profit. Did you know that no study was done to determine this? They didn't do like a survey of entrepreneurs and say, you know, what's your goal? Is it the highest price possible? Is it biggest market share? Is it, in fact, it was short-run profit maximization on top of that. In short run, all right, as opposed to the long run. Now, what's the difference? In the long run, maybe you want to establish some brand. Okay, there's a great movie called Mr. Mom, and very funny. And one of the things in there is that someone suggested this tuna company that they actually cut their prices. in order to increase their profits. Like, are you crazy? He says, no. We cut our profits now, cut our prices now during this recession to show people that we want to help them out. But we're going to raise them again later. We'll establish incredible loyalty to our brand. And it works incredibly well in the movie. So that would be long-term profit maximization. But what I learned was short-term profit maximization. And I discovered later that no one had done a study to determine this. It was literally like the example I gave you a minute ago. If economists wished to study the horse, they wouldn't go out and look at horses. They would sit in their studies and say to themselves, what would I do if I were a horse? What would I do if I was an entrepreneur? And this struck them as so obviously true, it couldn't be rejected. Well, of course they're trying to maximize profits, because in fact, if you don't, you get driven out of business. All right. So even if that wasn't your initial goal, it's got to be your eventual goal. Otherwise, you'll be driven out of business. You want to maximize your profits as quickly as possible. Again, this is an axiom. All right. This is I say it's a little bit derived from an axiom, but it's the idea of something that is untested and presumably obviously true. Actually, if you survey entrepreneurs, you get things more like market share is what they're after. But there's an even deeper element here as you'll see in the chapter on neoclassicism, where it says they don't even necessarily believe this is what entrepreneurs consciously do. It is the way they act. All right. So again, but going back to the original point here, it is an axiom. It is something that when you are putting your paper together, you didn't go out and well, okay, here's another example. I had a colleague in the department some years ago that was doing research on education, and in particular, she was doing research on why did high schools decide to have AP classes, all right? And she went through her paper and so forth, and it turns out that my wife teaches it not at a high school, but in grade school. And I said to this professor, I said, did you ask anybody? Did you go and ask a district, superintendent how they decided? And this professor, who was a neoclassical, said, well, no, I never thought about it. And so she wasn't against the idea, but the way she was trained, it never crossed her mind to go out and ask why they did it. She instead tried to infer indirectly why they did it, which is a reasonable thing to do too, because as they say in this school of thought, what you say you're doing and what you're actually doing aren't necessarily the same thing. Although I still think I would ask, because I think that at least tells you the idea that they think they're doing X when in fact they're doing Y is fascinating. I would want to know that. But it's very common. In international trade, when you do comparative advantage, it is based on a world that doesn't exist. And that is a world in which, in autarky, when neither country is trading with the other. All the ratios that you use to determine who imports and exports are ratios that don't exist in the real world, all right? But they're thinking, yeah, but that seems pretty reasonable. That seems pretty logical, all right? So that's a very common part of the neoclassical model. People are rational, which we'll come to down here. So, well, how do you know that? Well, it just seems reasonable. Because if they weren't rational, then think of all the bad things that would happen. So it must be true. All right, so this is, and again, this comes from their belief that looking at the historical data or surveys or whatever is actually deceptive. I mentioned earlier about those exchange rate studies that were very popular in the 80s, where they looked at the forecasts of future exchange rate movements. Almost every one of those articles started with an apology. I know we don't normally use survey data, but, all right, and that was right. They were using something that was out of line with what they usually did, so they felt like they needed to make an apology for it. Axiomatic modeling. We come up with our premises by sitting and thinking what makes sense. And why? Because we're lazy? No, because philosophically we believe that it's dangerous to base it on observation, that we can easily be deceived by our preconceptions and by people trying to deceive us with what they're really doing. All right, marginal analysis, second one. Now I'll read it here. I guess I took this out of the book, I don't remember. The belief that economic agents make decisions based on proportionally small additions to or subtractions from total quantities, all right? This, as you'll see in the book, was a factor in resolving the water-diamond paradox, which I'm not going to tell you about. You can read about that in there. But the idea is that, okay, how much will someone pay for a piece of cake? And the idea is it depends on how much cake they've had up to now. That it's not the quantity of cakes, it's the additional cake that makes a difference to you. That if you've already had 3 pieces of cake and you're thinking about having a 4th one, odds are you're not going to pay as much as you did for the first 3 because you're starting to feel sick. Your 10th piece of cake, someone might have to pay you to eat a 10th piece of cake, right? So as you eat more cake, the question of what would you be willing to pay for that cake is really a question of adding to the cake you've already eaten. All right? It is a proportional addition, a proportionally small piece of an addition. And so that's how we do the marginal cost, marginal revenue, all that kind of stuff. We're saying that Homo sapiens, and this isn't a prescription. This isn't economists saying you should make decisions like that. They're saying you already do make decisions like that. People make decisions based on proportionally small additions to or subtractions from total quantities. And that's the way, the proper way. And there's a little example in the book with the water diamond paradox, as you can see. But if you think about the idea of how much would you pay for the first piece of cake versus the second piece of cake versus the third piece of cake, you're kind of getting the idea. The relevant concept there is how much are you willing to pay to go from 0 to 1, from 1 to 2, and from 2 to 3. So that's from the marginalist economists in the 19th century. All right, next one, general equilibrium framework. Let's see what John Harvey said about that. A framework in which all variables are mutually dependent, exist in a timeless world, and remain at rest until an exogenous force creates a disturbance. All right. A general equilibrium framework is one, well, here's one right here. Quantity, price, demand, supply. All right. If you remember your high school math, that's an equation of a line with this intercept and that slope. That's an equation of a line with this intercept up here, if I drew it all the way to the vertical axis, and this slope. And how do you get the intersection? Oops, terrible cue. You set them equal to each other, right? You set them equal and you solve for either P or Q, it doesn't matter, and then you can plug it back into either one of the equations to get the answer. So this is a general equilibrium framework. Let me reread the description. All variables are mutually dependent. Which one's causing the price? The supply curve or the demand curve? Well, you can't say that because as Alfred Marshall, the economist, said, it's the supply and demand curve are like two blades of a pair of scissors. You can't say that one's cutting because one can't cut without the pressure from the other one. So, and if you talk about a broader general equilibrium framework, the idea is that if you change one price, that could affect all the other prices. If we're putting together an examination of an economy and we change the price of gas, well, then so much stuff gets shipped by truck, for example, or by aircraft or train, that if you change the price of gas, that's going to change the price of a lot of other stuff too. They're mutually dependent. You push one and it has an impact on the others as well. But here we can just think about the supply and demand curves. Exist in it. Do I want to do that next? Let me skip exist in a timeless world. I'll do that one last. Which remain at rest until exogenous forces create a disturbance. How long will the economy stay at P sub 0, Q sub 0? Forever. It's never going to move away from that unless we shift one of the curves. Unless an exogenous force steps in, an outside force steps in and moves a curve, it will stay there forever. All right. So this is a world in which the variables are interdependent, mutually dependent. The things just stay at rest until an outside force. Oh, you can't. Well, you can kind of see that. I just put a pen right there. I got something closer. All right, let me get this game out. I'll put it right here. Great game, Eclipse. There, that's better. Okay. Look, it's at rest, and it's not going to move until an exogenous force acts upon it. But look what happens when an exogenous force does act upon it. Give it a second. New equilibrium! And it will stay there forever until we act on it, until there's an exogenous force. So that's the way, and notice the parallels here with physics. Not a coincidence. And so that's another way, or another characteristics of general equilibrium modeling. The last one I was going to tell you about, timeless world. The dog's barking. This one's really quick and easy to show. Price, quantity. Hang on, I'll get the dog quiet. Okay. Here's the problem. Melanie has to get up at 5:30 tomorrow morning, and so she can't watch the dog anymore. It is 9:06 here in Fort Worth, Texas. So, hey, Cole, come. So this guy is standing around barking and stuff, so he's going to have to stay here and learn how this is a timeless world. Let's see. Yeah, okay. All right, so Coble, check this out. Coble, let's say that we have, yes, one supply curve. And then I'm going to draw, he loves these pens, by the way. He likes to get on the couch and eat them. Demand curve, quantity, price. I'm not going to subscript him because the fact that these are green is indicating that those are different from these. Quantity, price. Okay, so I've got a green demand curve with a green price and quantity, and a red demand curve with a red price and quantity. And the question is, which one happened first? What are you eating? I have no idea what that is, but he can have it. There you go. Did the green curve start off and then it shift to the red, or did it start at the red and shift to the green? There's absolutely no way to know. This is a timeless world. If you have a modeling issue or a phenomenon that you're studying where you really need to understand the passage of time, general equilibrium is not very good for it. Remember I told you already that the Austrian economists were not crazy about general equilibrium frameworks for that very reason, that it is difficult to show the dynamic nature of a capitalist system with something that has everything coming to a resting point and where time doesn't pass. You could equally argue that red was first and green was second, as opposed to green was first and red was second. And when the Great Depression happened, that changed what happened next, all right? So the order of events in history actually matters because the event that happened at A had an effect on the event that happened at B. Events here have no effect on what happens next, right? We just say, oh, it was at green, now it's at red, all right? So it's a timeless world. But it's a very popular modeling method, this general equilibrium. In fact, I remember reading a paper, I guess I was putting this class together the first time, and I found a paper where it said, it was arguing that the single unifying factor in it was by a Neoclassical, the single unifying factor was the general equilibrium framework. Interesting. Okay. Next two don't take too long. And the first one is free markets as natural and benevolent. Generally speaking, the idea that free markets are best, that you need to prove to me otherwise. They have arguments when they say the market doesn't work very well, but there's this basic idea that the economy fixes itself, which I'm going to do, the next concept I cover after this is going to be showing how they believe that, and that it's a good thing. No, it's true. It's absolutely true. And the last one, rationality. They are arguing or assuming that people in the economy are rational in the sense that the ball off a piece of paper and throw it. Hey, go get it! That agents are rational in the sense that they are able to evaluate alternatives and accurately select the one that best pleases them, all right? So, rational in what sense? You know what cards to play in blackjack? No. We don't need to tell you what to do. You already know what to do for you. You know better than anyone else what your preferences are, and given a set of choices, which one is best for you. And notice how this is kind of linked back to the whole, how do I word it? Political individualism stuff, all right? This is going back to the natural law stuff, that free markets are natural, the market system capitalism is natural, and is somehow good, all right, on top of that. And again, the next thing I'm going to go over is going to explain that. That's it for that concept. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, and I was going to do it tonight, but I guess I'll have to wait till tomorrow, is go over a particular neoclassical explanation that includes this, especially this, not so much the other two. But I want to give you a specific theory. I mean, it's one thing to go through lists of they're like this. Okay, well, but what give me an example. And furthermore, this example is going to be useful not only to illustrate some of these things here, but also as a contrast to what another school of thought is going to say later. Otherwise, that's it for tonight.